dad had been a deputy sheriff for a while, and so I kind of warmed up to that a little bit. And then I saw that the Biloxi, several cities at the same time were hiring police officers, and so I said, hey, you know what, let me give that a try, And so I did. I applied 2 or 3 different places, and actually Jackson County Sheriff's Department called me first, and they called me one morning early and told me that I had the job, and I believe December the 17th was my start date of 1990. And so I hung up and told my wife, I said, well, I guess I'm going to be a deputy sheriff, And then that afternoon, Biloxi called and said, hey, you've been hired, your start date is December the 17th, same start date. And I said, okay. So I hung up, and I had to make a decision then. And honestly, the decision came down to pay. And if you went to the sheriff's department, you had to spend the first year, at least the first year, at the jail. And I didn't really care too much for that, although I would have done it. But Biloxi paid $200 more, so it was about pay. Now, $200, not $200 a year more than Jackson County Sheriff's Department did at that time. When I started here, the city, and I hate to sound this way, but the city was virtually bankrupt. They had a hard time making the salary for the employees throughout the city. And I know that just before I got hired here, the officers had gone through a 10% pay cut. They'd gone through across the board and cut them 10%. And so there was some lean days there early on. I mean, uniforms and things like that. I mean, they were hard to come by, and you got just what you needed, and that was it. And sometimes you didn't quite get just what you needed. And then gambling came along, and I guess the big issue then was everybody believed that overnight, we were going to just become a crime mecca, and that just didn't happen. Gambling came in pretty quick. I mean, it wasn't anything slow about it. It came in pretty quick, and the money came along with it. And within a short period of time, we were making much better money, and the equipment that we needed was certainly plentiful. And it became a very pleasant place to work. That overnight criminal element we just didn't see. Now, there were some things that changed. There were some crimes we had never dealt with, gambling type issues we had never actually had to deal with. We saw those, and there was a few other things. We predominantly at that time, marijuana and crack cocaine were the drugs that you saw on the street, and we began to see some heroin and things. So there were a few things like that, but it certainly was a gradual thing. It didn't just take off overnight. We didn't have organized crime, running the streets like some people thought we would. When I started here in 1990, there was, I don't know the number of policemen. We worked 3 shifts, 3 8-hour shifts. There was not enough units for everybody, so your unit never stopped running. The unit just ran 24 hours a day. So one shift would go off, the next shift would come on, they'd get in the unit, and they'd go. And then I worked night shift predominantly while I was on patrol. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I would pull into the back door to unload my car for the next guy, and there would be our patrol commander standing back there with his notebook trying to find somebody to work over, because there just wasn't enough policemen. We would work 2 policemen east, 2 policemen west, and then we would have 1 policeman up north across the Pops Ferry Bridge. So if you got backup, and if one of those guys called out sick, you just had to deal with it. If you got backup, it was your supervisor coming to back you up, And that sergeant, usually a sergeant, there was usually only one. And man, he would just run from one side of town to the other trying to back each other up, trying to back up his troops. When the casinos came to town, that almost changed. I don't want to say overnight. It was gradual, but it certainly wasn't very gradual. We were able to hire more people, and we were able to staff the beats, the way they should have been staffed. So you would have an officer in every beat, so that would put you 3 east, and back then it put you 3 east, 4 west, and 1 up north. And then you would have 2 or 3 supervisors, and then we even had the luxury of having a floating unit, one east and one west, so they could float and help back up officers on calls, so one officer wouldn't have to leave his beat. The float unit would be your backup, and that worked very, very well. We do have a lot of special events. Back in the day, when I first hired on, the big event was Mardi Gras. Man, we planned for it. It took the whole day. It took a week's worth of planning, and then it took the whole day. If you remember, there were 3 parades in one day. And buddy, by the time that day was over with, you were worn out as a policeman. But Mardi Gras now is just not the deal that it once was for us. We have much bigger events now that we have to deal with. Everything from multitude of small events first. 5K runs, festivals, anything you can think of, almost every weekend, especially through the summer. And then when it's through the spring, there's something every weekend, I promise you. And then there's I guess about 8 large events that really take up some time. Everything from cruising the coast to spring break. Now we have the marathons, a couple of those a year. So it is very difficult to keep enough manpower to cover all of these different events. We need about 160 policemen, and Mayor Gillich has tried to get us there. I mean, he's appropriated the money for us to have about 150 policemen. But we don't have that. And like I said earlier, it's very difficult to hire anybody for this type of work right now. Again, I think that will change, but it may be another year or so before it does. So we're at about 120 is where we're at. Not nearly enough to handle all of the events that we have. So we've implemented, a couple of programs that have helped. We now pay reserve officers for big events. They're required to give us some time in order to be a reserve officer. But for large events, we actually bring them in and pay them. But there's only a few of those reserve officers now, simply because it's so difficult to be a reserve officer. Certainly, trying to stay within your budget has always been a problem. We do it pretty good here. We're pretty good at it because I have several people that help me monitor things, and we try to keep things within budget. But you can imagine that you never know when you're going to have a hurricane, and if you have multiple hurricanes in one budget year, the overtime that's going to take, it's hard to budget for that overtime. It's hard to budget for the unforeseen. So budget is always something that you have to struggle with and keep an eye on, and try to stay within something that's acceptable with your budget. Then I guess probably the drug situation for a long time was something that we struggled with because it was never ending, and it affected a lot of families. And when people are affected, a lot of times the police is the only direction they can go. So that was a major problem for us. We found ourselves not only trying to arrest drug violators, but also then slowly seeking help for them. Trying to find somewhere for someone who's addicted to cocaine to go. And some of that has begun to change now. You don't see cocaine nearly as much. I mean, the predominant drug on the street now, other than marijuana, is methamphetamine. And I think that eventually that will fade away, and something else will take its place. Whether it be heroin or whether we see an influx of cocaine. Those things they do that. They change, and then what goes out comes back. So I guess probably the biggest issue, and I know the biggest issue that we deal with right now is what a lot of people refer to as the homeless issue. And this is my opinion and my opinion only, and I've probably upset a few people by saying this, but I don't really believe that we have a huge homeless problem. We have a mental health problem. Now, some of those mental health people, are they homeless? Yes, but if you put them in a home today, you haven't fixed the problem. because the problem is that they need mental help, and they're not going to stay in that home. So if we could ever solve the mental health problem that we have, and not just in Biloxi, but everywhere that I've been in the last few years, if you could solve that mental health problem, then you would find, and I will refer to Biloxi here, you would find that Biloxi has almost no homeless problem at all. And I've talked to some of the local nonprofits around that deal with the homeless issues, and I think we're all pretty much in agreement that probably 80% of the people that you see that you believe fall into the homeless category, 80% of those suffer from some type of mental illness. 80%. And out of that 80%, somewhere probably around 70 or higher percent also suffer from an addiction problem, whether it be alcohol or drugs. So that's why I say that if we could solve that mental health problem, that I don't think that you would see the homeless issues that people believe that we have. Is it a homeless issue? Yes, but that is not the primary reason they're homeless. It's a mental health issue. I believe that 100%. I've gone back and tried to determine the history of the Biloxi Police Department. It's very difficult. There was a guy named Flanagan, I believe it was Flanagan, in 1841 that we believe was a town marshal here. But there's really not much up till about 1886. You really don't see anything. And then in 1886, there's a few articles that make reference to maybe a spring uniform that the city council decided to pay for. A few things like that, and they keep referring to a town marshal. But they also refer to Biloxi police officers. So I'm thinking at that time, there must have been a town marshal and then policemen under the town marshal. I guess the chief had went by the title of town marshal. It's the best I can tell. And you see that up till about 1880 something, somewhere in there, you see the first reference to police chief. And we all know that there's been some characters that were police chief, and there's been some characters that served as Biloxi police officers.
And some of them were loved, I guess.
Some of them were very loved, some of them probably should not have been police officers. But I don't know that we're any different than any other early law enforcement agency anywhere in the country. I'm sure there's been times things change, people's change, people's attitude changes, the community begin to view things differently. So what might have been acceptable at one time, now we look at it, we think, oh my God, there's no way we could accept that. But at that time, it was acceptable, so it's kind of hard to go back and judge some of that. But we do know that we had some problems in the police department, over the years. And again, probably like most police departments. But now we're the cutting edge police department, in my opinion, in the state of Mississippi. We have just about every element that you can think of as far as a bomb team and hostage negotiators and snipers and detectives and bicycle patrol, marine patrol. I mean, I could go on and on. We have just about everything that a department anywhere could have, more than most. It's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of money to keep those things going. So it's very, very important as a policeman to check your pride at the door. I'll be the first to tell you that you have to be a little bit arrogant to put on this badge and stand up and do what's right. It takes a little arrogance. That may not sound proper to a lot of people, but it does. It takes a little arrogance. You got to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. You got to be able to believe in yourself in order to do this job. So if officers aren't careful, they will allow that pride to kind of rule what they do. You can't do that. You have to remember that you're here to serve the public. You're here because of their need. If it wasn't for their need for law enforcement, you wouldn't be here. then it's easy for an officer to allow themselves to become or get emotional or get upset with somebody because of what they're saying, because it's pretty routine that someone that's upset are going to lash out at the police department. You have to remember, you have to keep it in the back of your mind always that they're not lashing out at you. It may appear that they are, but that they just went through something tragic. Most of the time, if you're dealing with them, they went through something horrendous, or they've really allowed themselves to get upset. You're the person there now with authority that's trying to calm them down. Naturally, they're going to lash out at you. And it's not just policemen. It's throughout the department. The front desk. Somebody comes in to file a report at the front desk. They're there because something has happened that they're not pleased about, right? And so you can pretty well depend on being the person that they're going to lash out at. You just have to understand that. You have to know that, I know it's not me. I know they're not upset, but they may appear that they may even say that they are. But the reality of it is they're upset about the situation. And so you've got to allow them some time to vent, and not let yourself get upset or get mad with them. Let them vent, let them get it out. 9 times out of 10, before they leave, they're going to apologize to you and say, hey, I shouldn't have offended you like that, or I shouldn't have attacked you that way. But I mean, that's human nature. We're all that way. I would say, give officers plenty of room. You have no idea what they've been dealing with all day long. And the reality of it is, in Biloxi, we answer somewhere between 12 to 1,800 calls right now, this time of year, every 7 days. That's a lot of calls, considering that you may have a dozen people working at a time, if that many. That's a lot of calls. So usually they're going from call to call to call, and so they're dealing with a horrendous scene here, and then they're leaving that, trying to put it behind them, going straight over and dealing with a beaten child, putting that behind them, and then they're coming out to deal with with your auto theft, the burglary of your vehicle. So they could be a little short, but you just have to keep in mind, the same thing applies that applies to the officer about keeping himself well grounded and understanding that people aren't really upset with him. I would ask the public to view it that same way. Understand that this guy's probably dealt with a half a dozen things today that the normal public, if they dealt with it just once a week, it would be upsetting. And these guys and gals deal with it all day long. I guess about 4 or 5 months, and I remember telling my wife, there's no way I'm going to do this for a living. I remember telling her that, and then 32 years later, here I am. But it's been very rewarding. Early on, there was a lot to learn, and I'm sure, just like any rookie cop, it really sets you back. So many procedures, so many things that you have to learn to do a particular way, and so it's a lot. Even today, it may be even more so now than it was, when I hired on. But I enjoyed it. Especially after I was cut loose on my own, I could make my own decisions, and I had plenty of help around me, plenty of veteran officers that I could fall back on, which is still very important today. Because you can't train for every situation, and it's important to have experience around you that can say, hey, let's lead you through this. And at this department, they've always been good about that. Sometimes you have to put up with a little ribbing about something, but other than that. And I know it's still that way today, that veteran cops are going to lead, other rookie cops around and show them what to do and show them the ropes and help them. you know what you want to say. Sometimes it's very difficult just to say it. So please bear with me. So thank you all for coming here today. Pay your respects to Robert, Pam, the kids, Robert's friends, to his squad, and to his profession. You know, Robert spent the majority of his life, of his adult life, working in the service of others. First as one of our nation's defenders in the United States Air Force, and then as a Biloxi police officer, keeping his community safe. Robert was proud of his family, proud of his profession. He was proud of his appearance. He kept a shine on those boots, and that uniform had to be just so. Robert tempered that pride with humility and compassion. And that was apparent by the way he did his job and the way he treated the people around him and the way people responded to him. Robert was kind and easy to talk to. So we ask ourselves, why such a man would be taken so quickly, too soon, and in such a horrible, horrible way? Well, I prayed about that and prayed about it. And in my mind, the answer came that God and God alone decides when we leave this earth. No one else. A misguided thug with a gun gets no credit. No credit for Robert's life at all. Misery and damnation is the only reward for his decision. But this day is not about how Robert died. This is a celebration of how Robert lived. The loves that he knew, the friendships that he made, the people that he helped, the lives he changed, the lives he saved, and the good times that he had. Those things can't be murdered or destroyed or erased. They have already happened. They've already been done, and they'll be a part of this world forever. Even if they're forgotten over time, they'll still be present forever in the humanity that we show towards one another.